Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on September the 23rd, 2020, and is current through the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Much Ado About Boimler, so beware of spoilers. Though, given Lower Decks continues to only be available in North America at the moment, I will be noting in the episode description the time codes for any Lower Decks discussion, so you can skip over them if you choose. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 6 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone. And my guest this week is Kerry Purvis. Kerry, welcome to WeeklyTrek.
Thanks so much for having me, Alex.
Well, Kerry, I ask my guests this question every week. I want to know something that's got you feeling good about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
What's got me moving at Warp 10 is I just discovered this really cool podcast called All the Asians on Star Trek, and it's done by Phil Yu, and I love his podcast. They call us Bruce. It's really awesome. It's an unfiltered conversation about Asian America, and now there's this magnificent podcast. So on his podcast this week, the most recent episode was with Michelle Krusik. Do you know who that is? Do you remember?
No, tell me.
She was in the Deep Space Nine episode Time's Orphan. She played...
Oh, sure. Yes. Old Molly.
Yep. Yeah. They, in the script, I guess they called her Feral Molly.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, she was the last guest on the show, and it's just so fun. And I love Phil Yu a lot, and I didn't know he was a Star Trek fan. So it's really cool to hear him talking about Star Trek and talking with all these different guest stars. And I'm really hoping that he'll have Brian Tochi on the show. Are you familiar with him?
No, remind me.
Oh, he's like, this is a little bit of trivia. So Brian Tochi was on the episode, the TOS episode. He was Ray. He was one of the kids on And the Children Shall Lead.
Oh, right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then on TNG and Night Terrors, there's a part on the bridge where Ensign Rager can't remember how to enter the codes. So they have him come and sit down, and he played Ensign Lin. So he was a little boy on TOS, and then he got to be on TNG as a grown-up. And I just think that is so cool. So I really hope they interview him on All the Asians on Star Trek.
Oh, that's awesome. So they do, it's not sort of limited to just one of the Star Treks. They do all of the iterations of the show?
Yes. Yep. They also interviewed, I'm forgetting his name already, the man who played Admiral Yamamoto. And I always remember him on All Good Things when he was talking to Picard and saying, don't cross the neutral zone. And hearing him was really cool, too. I'm just so excited. Oh, I can't wait for them to talk to Linda Park because I love Hoshi Sato so much. So
yes.
I'm so excited for that.
You are thinking of Clyde Kusatsu.
Yes. He's a cool guy. Really cool guy.
And I guess I saw this the other day in his Star Trek The Next Generation appearances. They aged him up. He was actually a much younger actor when he
talked
appeared
about that
in the show.
on this show too. It was really it's really interesting. I didn't know that, but now I do kind of notice that it's interesting because when we first watched TNG, they didn't have it didn't have the quality that it does now with things being remastered. And I think it's a little more obvious now that he was aged. But yeah, it's really cool to learn that, though. All these little things we learn on these podcasts and interviews years later, it's really interesting to find out.
Well, it's funny. The thing you're feeling good about this week is a podcast, and the thing I'm feeling good about this week is also a podcast. I have actually been really enjoying the first 2 episodes that have been released to date of the Pod Directive, the new official Star Trek podcast hosted by Tawny Newsome and Paul F. Tompkins. Kerry, have you listened to this one yet?
I have not, but I've heard about it. It sounds really good.
Yeah, it actually is. I mean, as if we needed more Star Trek podcasts in our lives at the moment, right? But this one actually is worth the time. So the 2 episodes they've done so far, the first episode, they interviewed the actor Ben Stiller, who turns out, massive Star Trek fan, actually has a collection of props and stuff from the original series, including the original latex mask of the Gorn head from Arena. And then the most recent episode was a discussion with the religious scholar scholar Reza Aslan about the episode Darmok. Turns out he's a massive Star Trek fan, in addition to being quite a well-known sort of writer and philosopher. And he's a huge Star Trek fan, and he's a huge TNG fan. And it's this fascinating discussion about Darmok and how to think about it in a religious context, and sort of what we can learn about modern religion from the Temerians and the way that they speak in metaphor and all of that. It actually was a really, really quite fascinatingly in-depth discussion, which you wouldn't normally expect from, you know, some kind of corporate product like an official Star Trek podcast would be. It was actually a fascinating discussion, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the episodes they have coming up this season.
That sounds really incredible. I definitely want to listen to that episode. It'll be so interesting to hear from a religious perspective about Darmok. It's such a captivating episode, I think, and how they speak in metaphor. It's just so iconic. Like, I find myself sometimes saying, Shaka, when the walls fell.
Yep. You know, it's funny. It's like that episode predicted the existence of meme culture about 20 years before it was really a thing.
Yes. Have you seen that meme where what is his name? The Temerian who met Picard. He's got his arms out, I think, and he was saying one of his metaphors, and Picard is saying, Shaka, 6 feet, dude.
Very appropriate in these times. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
Star Trek's Emmy streak for outstanding prosthetic makeup for a series, limited series, movie, or special extended to a second year running this week, as Star Trek Picard's makeup team took home the Emmy for Star Trek Picard. Last year, Star Trek Discovery's second season took home the coveted award for the episode If Memory Serves, and this year, the Picard team, led by James McKinnon and Neville Page, won for the episode Absolute Candor, for which the makeup team had to create a number of diverse Romulan looks, and of course, reintroduced Seven of Nine and her iconic Borg makeup. Unfortunately, the Makeup Emmy was the only win of the week for Star Trek. Picard lost out in 2 other categories for which it had been nominated, and despite a strong push by CBS and Alex Kurtzman, the short treks did not take home the Emmy for Outstanding Short-Form Comedy or Drama. Star Trek lost out to AMC's Better Call Saul Employee Training, Legal Ethics with Kim Wexler, which, given it is a companion to one of the best shows on television right now, makes the loss for Star Trek a little easier to stomach, in my opinion. Kerry, how do you feel about Star Trek having taken home the Outstanding Makeup Emmy for the second year in a row?
I think it's so awesome, and it's so deserved. The makeup in Absolute Candor was incredible. I think Jerry Ryan as 7 of 9, she looked awesome. Her prosthetics looked great, and yeah, what they did with the Romulans, all of their prosthetics, that was really amazing. And yeah, I think it's very well deserved. Star Trek has always been so good with makeup, I think, and I'm so glad to hear they won this. It's really cool.
Yes, they join Star Trek Voyager's infamous episode Threshold in
my gosh. Oh my goodness.
in being episodes of Star Trek that have won makeup Emmys. Yes, the Emmy-winning Star Trek Voyager episode Threshold. Who can believe it?
I think that, I can't remember the name of the last Lower Decks episode I watched, but it was the one where Boimler, like they had the transporter accident,
yes.
And he was flowing.
Much
and then
ado about Boimler.
Yes, and they went to the place where there were all the people who'd been in the accidents,
yep.
And there was a creature that I'm pretty sure
Anthony.
I started yelling, and I'm like, look, I think that's Janeway's baby there, because it looked like a salamander. So then I had to explain it to my husband, because he's like, that doesn't look like if Janeway had a baby. That doesn't look like a human baby. So, yeah. So there's a little...
I'm convinced that is absolutely what that is, complete with like the weird sort of whisker things that the salamanders in Threshold had. Yeah, they sort of skip over it, but it's, it's one of those great Lower Decks kind of jokes where if you'd never seen Threshold before, you would just be like, oh, that's kind of a weird looking alien. That's sort of disgusting. But if you've seen the episode, the joke just has so much more depth to it and becomes, frankly, hilarious as a result.
Oh, yeah, it's so hilarious. And now my husband's going to see Threshold because of it. And yeah, I think a lot more people might be introduced to Threshold now. And that's just such an iconically terrible episode, I think.
Oh, boy. Yes, it is. But Emmy award winning nonetheless.
Yes, exactly. Well, and that deserved it, too. So, yeah. I think this is a good tie-in here.
Yes, it is. And, I think there are many things for which the Star Trek TV shows deserve to consistently win Emmys. Makeup is one of them. Special effects is probably another.
Yeah.
Music is another. And there are certainly some amazing standout acting performances from various sort of actors and characters from the shows that are on right now. But I think if there's one where it feels like, look, it should be a lock every year for Star Trek, I think it's the Makeup Emmy. And I look forward to them winning many more years in the future, because so far, particularly once we've sort of gotten past the initial shock of the redesign of the Klingons towards some of the kind of faithful updates of existing Star Trek races that the current makeup teams have been doing on shows like Discovery and Picard. It just really is incredible work that they have done, and I think, so well deserved.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Well, after months of teasing that big changes were coming to CBS All Access following the merger between CBS and Viacom into the imaginatively named Viacom CBS late last year, the company has announced that CBS All Access will be rebranded as Paramount Plus beginning early next year. In addition to the rebrand and overhaul to the service, which is expected to bring much more content from across Viacom CBS's many platforms to the streamer, the international expansion of the new Paramount Plus will also begin. Later next year, Paramount Plus will launch in Australia, Latin America, and the Nordic countries. Despite the rebrand, though, Paramount Plus will still remain the exclusive home in the US of most new Star Trek content, including Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and Strange New Worlds. And whether the international expansion of Paramount Plus portends the future Star Treks will eventually find their home there or not outside the US is still an open question. As we know, Discovery is on Netflix outside of the US and Canada. Picard is on Amazon Prime outside of the US and Canada. Unclear yet where Lower Decks will eventually land, where shows like Strange New Worlds, Section 31, etc. will eventually land. I suppose it could be on an international version of Paramount Plus, but it does sound like they are taking the expansion slowly, given that they are only at this point planning to launch in a small number of countries next year outside of the US. But Kerry, what do you think about the announcement that CBS All Access will be rebranded and relaunched as the, again, imaginatively named Paramount Plus?
Oh, it's so imaginatively named. I think it's very cool, and I really hope that the Star Trek Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds, I hope that will be expanded into the international community, just because I feel like that's one unfortunate thing with Star Trek, or has been over the years, is that the lack of accessibility for people outside of the US. And I mean, obviously there's ways to watch it, but I think having it be more available to all fans in as many places as possible is a really cool thing. So I'm excited to see where this goes and how far they'll be expanding it, or if they do.
Right. And I think if they do is an apt question, because, we don't know that the best thing, because we don't know the business side of it. We don't know whether it's more lucrative for Viacom CBS to launch their own version of this in all the international markets, or whether they continue to sell it to other venues that have access to it, like Netflix, like Amazon Prime. It could even be on a TV network in some of these countries. But I think, it certainly is. I saw some stuff about how, they're already kind of putting a new slap of paint on CBS All Access only a few years after launching it. It means it can't be doing very well. But, first of all, it actually has been, 4 years since the service launched. Second of all, they did go through a massive corporate merger. And third of all, this is going to bring a large amount of new content to the platform. And, I think what's a good sign on the international front is, and I think they talked about this at Viacom CBS when they announced the rebrand, Paramount Pictures is a much more internationally recognized brand than CBS. Right? CBS is a network in the US, and that's about it. But Paramount is an international, global movie studio. And so using the Paramount brand as opposed to the CBS brand is actually one that's going to resonate, I think, much more outside of the US than it is inside of the US.
I agree.
And who knows, about the expansion. I mean, I would feel very sorry for international viewers who now had to subscribe to a third streaming service in order order to get access to the full range of Star Trek with Discovery on Netflix, Picard on Prime, and then maybe, some of these other shows on Paramount Plus.
That's
but
very true. Yeah.
But I think we'll just have to wait and see how that ultimately shakes out. And my guess is they probably don't know, and that launching the new service in Latin America and in the Nordic countries and in Australia is a good way of testing what the right approach is, whether it's, to do a Disney Plus and a Netflix to launch worldwide and then start dropping your shows worldwide at the same time, or whether it is something slightly different than that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes.
It sure is. And hopefully for us in the US, the one thing I've always asked for, because CBS All Access has done a horrible job of this, is giving us the original presentation of some of these episodes that they have on CBS All Access, like the pilots and series finales, where rather than presenting us the 2-hour feature-length cuts of these episodes that were originally broadcast, they're giving us the 1-hour syndication cuts, like Encounter at Farpoint's broken up into 2 episodes, which is ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous. Yeah.
It's so ridiculous. So hopefully they will fix that along the way as well. That's the only thing I want out of Paramount Plus.
Yeah, I would agree absolutely that they do need to fix that. Definitely.
Well, if recent virtual Star Trek panels for San Diego Comic-Con in July and for Star Trek Day earlier this month were not enough for you, then I have some good news. Star Trek is also coming to New York Comic-Con's virtual event in October. On Thursday, October the 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern, that's 9 a.m. Pacific, the Star Trek Universe panel will be live streamed on YouTube and feature conversations with the casts of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Lower Decks. Given that Lower Decks' season finale will have dropped that day and Discovery's season 3 premiere will follow the next week, we expect there will be plenty to talk about. In addition, CBS have promised some surprise guests and reveals, and we know, thanks to some hype on Twitter, that at least one of those reveals will involve the new Nickelodeon animated show, Star Trek Prodigy. We don't know what we'll find out about Prodigy in a couple of weeks, but a number of producers and writers for the show tweeted that it's a panel we wouldn't want to miss when the news broke about New York Comic-Con. So I think that's a very clear wink, wink, nod, nod that there is potentially some big Prodigy news on the way. So Kerry, are you looking forward to another virtual Star Trek panel? And what do you hope to learn about Star Trek Prodigy?
I am very much looking forward to that. It's so interesting. 2020, it's just been a terrible year with the pandemic and whatnot. And I think that the Star Trek community has really stepped it up since we can't attend conventions because it's not safe. There have been all these virtual events, and I live in Maine in the US, and it's kind of isolated up here. We don't really have conventions in Maine. We have to drive at least 3 hours to Boston. So for me, I feel like I've actually been more active going to conventions because I can do it from my house on my computer. I love it. And this sounds like it's going to be fun too. And Star Trek Prodigy, I'm excited to learn about that. I have a niece who is 9, and I've been wanting to watch Star Trek with her, and I've been trying to think of what to show her. And Lower Decks has been an option, but I really am interested to see what Prodigy is like, because I think that might be something I could introduce her to as well. Yeah, what about you?
I would love a San Diego Comic-Con 2019 version of learning a bit more about Prodigy, because that was where we got for Lower Decks we got a confirmation of when it was set, and we got our first look at the animation style and the characters. Yeah. And so I would love to learn about Prodigy at this New York Comic-Con virtual panel. Sort of what is the setting of the show, right? We know from that sort of tagline they put out when they first announced it that it's about a group of lawless teens who find a derelict starship and use that ship to search for meaning, messages, or, whatever. But we don't know anything more than that. Like, when is it set? Is it set in the TOS time? Is it set in the 24th century? Is it set all the way in the Discovery kind of, 32nd century time frame? Is it, something entirely different? So I'd love to learn a little bit more about where it kind of sits in the timeline, and I'd love to get a look at whatever the animation style is they're planning. It might be nice to get introduced to some characters, but I don't necessarily kind of need that at this point. I'd just like to learn a little bit more about the setting and the context.
Yeah, I think I would, it doesn't have to be now, but I'd like to know who the voice actors are going to be too.
For sure, yeah. And, I have to think, it's funny because they are like they teased in the press release for this that there will be some quote-unquote surprise guests. And then the Prodigy guys all ran out and were like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you're going to learn more about Prodigy. So I kind of have to think that maybe there's another surprise that we don't know about yet. And I wonder if there's some like legacy character involvement with Prodigy that will also be announced as part of that. That's a free wish or theory. We're not even in the right part of the show yet. But that's a teaser wish for that New York Comic-Con Prodigy panel, is that we learn a bit more about Prodigy and maybe the involvement about a beloved favorite character from a previous show.
Yeah, it's all very exciting news. I'm excited to see what we find out.
And lastly, FanSets launched a line of Star Trek Lower Decks character pins to coincide with Star Trek Day. The new releases feature the ensemble of 4 main ensigns, Boimler, Mariner, Tendi, and Rutherford, as well as Captain Freeman, Commander Ransom, Dr. Ta'ana, and Lieutenant Shax. You can purchase the full set of characters on FanSets' website for $49.95. In addition to the Lower Decks pins, FanSets have announced they now have the ability to transition their full-size combadge replicas from pin backs to magnet backs, a frequent ask from cosplayers looking to add the badges to their Star Trek costumes without damaging them. Over the next few months, the Picard, Voyager, and Discovery combadges will be reissued with magnetic clasps, and all future releases will be offered as both pin and magnet options. FanSets have had to delay the release of the previously announced All Good Things combadge, but they have also announced that the Lower Decks combadge, Section 31 badge, and Enterprise badges from Discovery Season 2 are all in the works. And given that, QMX, who was the other licensee making full-size replicas of the combadges, announced the Enterprise badges for Discovery Season 2 coinciding with the premiere of Discovery Season 2 in January of 2019, and we have not seen sight nor sound of them in the nearly 2 years since that happened. It's actually exciting that FanSets will finally be producing a version of that badge, and that it's going to have the magnet backing as well, because I know that's going to be a big draw for cosplayers who want the badges, but they don't want to stick a pin through. In some cases, they're very expensive costumes if you have the Innovos versions. So, Kerry, do you collect any of the FanSets pins, and what did you think about these Lower Decks character pins?
I have a Dr. Crusher pin, and I used to wear it when I worked at the library. And there was a library director, I think it was at Columbia University, who said that libraries should not put up pictures of Star Trek because it discourages women from going into the STEM field, which is not true. So I bought a Dr. Crusher pin and wore it on my lanyard at work because she's a science officer. So I love my Dr. Crusher pin. And yeah, I'm very excited about these comm badges. I think it's great, the magnetic back. Like, I'm not a cosplayer, but I don't really like sticking pins through my clothing. So I think that's very cool to have a magnetic option. And yeah, the Lower Decks ones, they look really cool. I think that's exciting. And I think they need to have a dog one too, because dog was awesome from that last episode. So they need a dog pin.
Well, they have said that from the previous episode, Terminal Provocations, I think I'm remembering that right, that they will be making a version of Badgie, the murderous, clippy takeoff that was voiced by Jack McBrayer. So that's very fun. And yes, I think they also do need to do a version of the dog, though I would prefer the one without the sort of distended jaw that has the bats flying out of it.
Yeah,
that was a little too creepy for me.
Yeah, that was a little... they should do a series of all the animals so they could have Dog and Porthos and Spot and Chester and Grudge. That would be so cool.
I would be so down for that. I would buy those in a heartbeat.
Me too.
All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So, Kerry, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
Okay, so this is a theory, and it's also a wish. So my theory and wish is when Star Trek Picard Season 2 comes out, that Hugh is not dead. And that's a wish because I love Hugh, for one thing. And then my theory is because Hugh Culber on Discovery, he wasn't dead. So I am hoping and theorizing that this Hugh will also not be dead. I don't know what the storyline would look like there, but Jonathan Del Arco is so amazing, and I would just love to see more of him on Picard. So that is my wish/theory.
The decision to kill Hugh in Star Trek Picard is the biggest creative choice they made that I just flat out disagreed with.
Oh, same.
And Nepenthe is a top shelf episode, except for that one moment and that one decision they made. It just felt like such a wasted opportunity to do more of an explanation of this fabulous character. And it's obvious that they created, they sort of updated the character to give him all of this rich backstory with the other Borg characters who, he never met, because 7 of 9 came way after The Next Generation. But it's obvious him and 7 had a history in those intervening years, but they never even met on the show. And that's just a huge shame. So I'm 100% with you on your wish and hope they find a way to make it happen. And, given it's Star Trek, that I suppose they, life finds a way, right?
It does. That's true.
How do you think you would like to see him come back?
Oh, I haven't really thought about that. I think it would, having him reunite with 7 somehow, or actually what really was moving to me when he was on Picard was when they were on the Borg ship and Picard was just kind of feeling like he was losing his sense of self a little bit because he was thinking about being Locutus. And Hugh said to him, no, you're Jean-Luc Picard, really telling him, you are you, and helping him maintain that sense of reality. And Picard's gone through this big change where he's now a synth. And I think having Hugh again in his life, I think Hugh is someone who would be a good support. And I think having him have some sort of a relationship with Picard, somehow having them come back together and build on that, I would love to see that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, if any of the Star Trek Picard writers are listening to the show, and I'm sure they aren't, but if they are, you've got your way back in for Hugh to reunite with Picard once again. So my theory this week is also a Star Trek Picard theory, and my theory is that they are moving closer to filming for Star Trek Picard Season 2. Now, that sounds like an audacious theory, given that California is still sort of grappling with a resurgence of COVID-19 infections, and that production schedules for shows all across the world have been disrupted because of COVID-19, and that Star Trek Picard was supposed to have started filming all the way back in June and would have been largely, at least halfway through the season by now. And in interviews that were conducted in the sort of May-June timeframe, there was no real clarity from the production about when they were planning to start filming again, just that, they were sort of taking it as it comes. Well, I have 2 sort of evidence points for why I think there may be plans underway to return to filming, just as it seems like production in Hollywood is slowly starting back up again. So my first and perhaps least convincing piece of evidence is the commercial that was released this week with Sir Patrick Stewart facing off against Mark Hamill for Uber Eats. So it's clear that, so if you watch Sir Patrick Stewart's daily sonnets, you will see he's grown a bit of a goatee. And it's the same goatee he has in the Uber Eats commercial, which tells me that that was filmed relatively recently. So what can we tell from that? I mean, it's not an apples to apples comparison, filming a commercial versus filming 10 episodes of a major television show, but it certainly shows that Sir Patrick Stewart is open to the idea of getting back in front of the camera. He's not a hard no on filming anything at all, because he's now done this commercial, and it's a hilarious commercial. If you haven't seen it, I recommend seeking it out. But my second evidence point is perhaps more compelling. And despite my feelings about the fact that Star Trek Las Vegas should be cancelled this year and it shouldn't be going ahead in December because of COVID-19, it had actually announced about 10 days ago that Evan Evagora, who played Elnor on Star Trek Picard, would be appearing at STLV. Now, who knows if that ultimately ends up happening, but Evan Evagora has been in Australia since the spring, and Australia actually has quite strict rules, not just about who can enter the country, but also has very strict strict rules about who can exit the country as well. You basically need to have a really good reason, like it's really essential for your job in order to get an exit visa to leave Australia right now with COVID happening. I don't think that a convention appearance at STLV would quite be enough for the Australian government to grant Evan a visa to leave. However, we do know that there is filming for a number of Hollywood productions now taking place in Australia, and that the government has been issuing exit and entry visas for either Australian citizens or for non-Australian citizens wanting to come to Australia in order to get in and out for Hollywood productions, which makes me think that Evan has been announced as a December guest for STLV. At some point, he's got to get from Australia to the US. Why would he have a reason to leave Australia? And what would be a good enough reason for the Australian government to let him leave filming for Star Trek Picard Season 2? Now, this could all just be, as usual, me dramatically reading far too much into the tea leaves. But what this tells me is that Evan Evagora has a reason to come back to the United States, and that Sir Patrick Stewart is not a hard no on returning to work. And so those two pieces of evidence put together indicate to me that I would not be shocked if we find out that Star Trek Picard begins filming either before the end of this year or early next year. Kerry, what do you think?
I think your evidence makes sense. Yeah, especially with Evan. I'm really excited that they might be filming. I agree with you. That would be so awesome. And it's funny, I've been thinking about, with Star Trek, so many scenes are just people talking on screens. And I wonder if there's a writer out there that would be up for a challenge of writing an entire episode like that and just making it spectacular. And that would be a fun way to film it too, that's safe. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that would be a good way to get things rolling. But yeah, I think now I'm really excited. Yeah, all you said there, I think those are pretty strong pieces of evidence in my opinion. So I will be keeping an eye out.
Because it is the one kind of biggest disappointment of the COVID-19 pandemic as it relates to the way in which it has sort of impacted the production of Star Trek, which is in Discovery Season 4, I mean, as far as we know, and there was some tweet from Doug Jones's personal trainer the other day that said, Doug's in the best shape of his life and ready to film Discovery Season 4, which makes me think, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they're all about to go back to Toronto to start filming Discovery Season 4. That was almost certainly going to happen in the fall, one way or another. Like, we were supposed to be in a position where Picard Season 2 would begin airing in January because they were going to film it, you know, over the course of this year and be ready to go 1 year after the season 1 premiere. But that's obviously just not going to happen now. You know, it's going to be late next year by the time they manage to get Picard out. And that's even if I'm right, they are moving towards filming and it is going to start up in the next couple of months, or it's going to start up early next year. So, you know, that is the big disappointment. And I would really love for them to find a way to make it happen. But obviously, as you say, it's also really important that they do it safely, because this is obviously a dreadful pandemic. It's killed a lot of people. And so it's not worth it to do it if it can't be done in a way that is safe and responsible. And I'm hoping that, you know, the Star Trek production folks and the producers will take all the right precautions and will do all the right things. But there's a piece of me that just is very excited at the prospect of things sort of returning as much to normal as possible.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And what you said about safety is so important, especially for Patrick Stewart, I think, and anyone else who works, who's on the cast, or anyone who works behind the scenes who might be in a high-risk group. It's very important that it be done safely. And it's disappointing that we've had to wait. But I think we would all agree that it's more important that it be safe and we can wait a little longer. Do
you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Kerry Purvis, for joining me today. Kerry, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at CareBearLib, BEARLIB. And if you're a Spanish speaker, you can find me at Kerry Trek, KARITREK.
And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Kerry. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.